Hi, welcome back to the Biblical Preaching Podcast, joined by Mike.
Hello.
Hello. And we're going to talk about something. Oh, this one matters. This matters. I really am excited for us to talk about this.
Yeah, so I need to describe sort of how I'm envisioning sort of the situation or the issues. So sometimes this can happen like by our own fault, on purpose. Sometimes it can just happen. But it's the feeling or the experience of being overly technical, overly detailed in kind of language and content.
Unnecessarily obfuscatory.
Yes.
There's an example.
Yeah, we can. I'm not sure we're going to use that as a title, but well, I'm not sure how to spell either of those words. But yeah, it's that kind of high level language that we can sometimes use, and when we use it, sometimes on purpose, it's to have an experience of being impressive, and we can use really high level technical, language. And it impresses people. Some people, it impresses.
Well, we think it does.
Sure.
I'm not sure it actually impresses people as much as we think it does. But yeah, there's that motivation. I think we've got to acknowledge that motivation's probably there in all of us, that we want to be liked. We want to be impressive. We want to come across as well-educated and on top of our subject.
Yeah. And there'd be certain groups of people that we're preaching to that is actually that is how you are impressive, is the higher level you go, the more impressive you are. But then sort of the flip side to the same issue of that over technical high level language used is the pain of losing people in your communication. So we think sometimes that we're being impressive, and some people might be impressed with what we're saying, but we can really easily lose people in what we're trying to say. Again, whether we're doing it on purpose or just we haven't really thought it through, the language we're using, it's all too easy for people to not follow along and not to be brought along to hearing about Jesus. So that's kind of the issue which we're thinking through.
I think it's important to clarify. We're not saying that every time someone says something overly technical, they are trying to show off.
Right.
Because, that's between them and God, although you can kind of sense it sometimes and it is quite repulsive. But what we are saying is that even if it's by accident, that someone uses something too technical in what they're saying, if it doesn't communicate with your listeners, there's a problem.
Yeah. Even
if your heart is completely loving, kind, gentle, and meek, your motivation may be perfect, but if it's not communicating, well, that's kind of central to what we're talking about. We want to communicate.
Exactly. And one of the things which we've been quite careful in how we say it is that we're saying overly technical or high-level language. We're not saying anything that is technical. And like, don't be technical, don't be interesting and detailed. We're just saying actually in the language that we use particularly and in how we communicate complicated things, it takes thought.
Yeah, and we're definitely not saying don't study or don't know stuff. Like that's part of what you're supposed to do as a preacher, to be as trained and as educated as you can be as a good steward of your ministry. So by all means, read heavy stuff, read complex stuff, access a library, please, and, do the digging. But there's a point where you have to kind of leave the academic world and step into the world of your listeners, and it's an act of love for them to communicate in a way that they can understand what you're talking about.
Yeah. So there are certain things that you do in the study that need to stay in the study, and somewhere between that walk, literally or kind of figurative, the walk between the study and the pulpit or the place of delivery, things are you need to think, okay, how am I communicating? How am I taking this to there?
Yeah, and I would say not even at that point, I would say sooner. So when you shift from the study, which is the Bible passage work, and you shift into writing a message. Do you know what I mean? So when you're thinking, right now, I've got my main idea, I've understood this passage, I've prayed about it. It's, it's been a hopefully wonderful experience. But now I need to form a message that's going to communicate to this group of people this coming Sunday or whatever the situation is. Even as I'm writing the message, I want to be thinking how to communicate, what language is appropriate, what level, if I'm in a classroom in a seminary, a chapel service in a seminary, maybe I could use technical language. I wouldn't, because I would want to set an example to the students even there of the fact that it is possible to communicate clearly without being overly technical. But in normal life, normal church, normal event, whether, whatever the setting, people are not at that level, and so it has to be communicated more simply. But that doesn't mean that you have to dumb down your study. It just means you have to clarify your communication.
Yeah, and not even dumb down your communication.
No,
we're doing exactly what you're saying. So, I mean, one of the things that I tend to think very, very basic, very base level is one way around this is to always be explaining what you're saying or defining. So if you have to use, if you feel that you have to use a technical term because it's a helpful summary of what you're saying, just define simply what that means and define it multiple times.
So, for example, we'll come back and we'll think through some categories, but here's an example that you mentioned earlier: chiasm.
Yeah.
Right. So a chiasm, if you use the word chiasm when you're preaching, you then need to explain what that means. You don't have to give the whole etymology of the Greek letter that it comes from and all that stuff, but just give people a sense that it's like a sandwich construction, that you've got kind of the outer layers and then you move in towards the inner layer. So you can develop that and talk in terms of the bread and then the butter or mayo or whatever country you're in, and then the meat in the middle. That meat is the point. That's what defines the sandwich. Now, one thing you can do is say, right, this is a chiasm, let me explain that. Or you can not even bother using the word chiasm and you can just explain it.
Yes, that's exactly right.
So there's kind of levels of clarity. So if you just said, this passage is a chiasm, and then carry on, you've lost people. If you say, this passage is organized a bit like a sandwich, and the point of a sandwich is the thing that's in the middle, and that's what we're looking at here. Notice how it, and you kind of take people through. That's the much more accessible version where you haven't used the word chiasm at all, but anyone in the room that knows what a chiasm is going to think, oh, he's talking about a chiasm. Or, if the word slips out or you use the word, then you have to explain it. So there's kind of layers of explanation needed for the technical term, and even the possibility of not using it. And I think we have to keep that option in mind.
Yeah. So that's just kind of almost the most basic thought, really. But what else have we got to?
Well, let's think about the categories first of all, because I can think of 4 off the top of my head. 4 kind of areas of technical terminology that can creep into our preaching that could either come across as showing off, or might be showing off. That's between you and the Lord. Or it could just not communicate and lose people, which we don't want to do. So the first one, kind of the immediate one for me, is original languages. Okay, so should we just talk about them as we go? Probably better than giving a list, isn't it?
Yeah.
So original languages. So again, there's layers, right? You can say, when you're explaining a text, there's a term in it, you want to say something about the original language. You can say, the Greek word here is whatever, and then pronounce it, epiginosko. And then you kind of give a clarification and a bit of an explanation. And some people do get excited when people do that and kind of feed the beast and it gets perpetuated. So that's kind of, in my mind, biggest red flag. You're using a term that sounds totally Greek to other people, and some people may love it, some people will switch off. They'll feel intimidated. They'll feel like, I can't know that. How am I supposed to know that? I can never read my Bible. Where am I ever going to understand this thing? I need you. That's the problem with it. And so that's in my mind, the worst kind of use of original language. And again, I'm not saying don't use original language. If you've studied Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, if you're, on top of that, great, use it. But it doesn't have to show in your preaching. It can show in your technical excellence, in your kind of accuracy in the way you handle the text and so on. But showing that you're using it can be a problem. Okay, so there's the kind of say the word. I would say it'd be much better to shift to saying in the Greek rather than saying the Greek word. But even then, it still has the same potential to switch people off. So better than that, maybe say in the original language. And don't name the language. People either know it or don't know it. It doesn't matter. Or why not say it? Like if you've got an insight on the text, why not just give the insight? Do you know what I mean? So instead, let's say a word that you're reading has a sense of something specific. You can be really subtle. Read the text, and as you read it, add the clarification without saying this is a clarification. Just restate it in your own words, and that can be enough. And nobody's put off. Nobody's saying, where did you get that from? You know, it's like, well, you're reading it through, you're explaining it, you kind of give an explanation of what it means, and you can do that without flagging the fact that you're referring to original languages. Yeah,
because we want people to trust that they can understand the Bible written in their language.
That's huge.
And so, you know, sometimes there's, you know, an apologetic thing that we can do in our preaching, but usually that's not the time to do it. And that, you know, by throwing lots of Greek words or Hebrew words around, it's not going to help people to trust the Bible in their language.
I was in a meeting once, and somebody was speaking. I'm not going to name names, obviously, but he was kind of trying to clarify a detail in the text, and he said, the translators really did a number on us here.
Oh.
I just wanted to bang my head against the pew in front. That was a horrific statement. The translators didn't do a number on us like that. Why don't we all throw our Bibles away if that's the case? You know, like that's a real problem. So you may have an issue with the translation. Don't make a scene. Just fix and flow, you know, move on, because the potential downside is so great in that. When I was in seminary, I'd had a certain professor for a couple of classes, but they'd all been English language classes at the start. And one day he walked in and there was some Greek on the board left over from a previous class. And I forget if he either read it or he said something about it. And I was sat at the front. I said, "Oh, are you, like, can you handle Greek?" And he looked at me. He's like, "Yeah, I teach Greek classes as well." And I said, "Oh, sorry, I didn't know if you did or not." And he said, "Someone told me once that Greek is like your underwear. It's important that you're wearing it, but don't let it show." And he was a great example of that, because I'd heard him preach in chapel. I'd heard him teach in class. I had no clue that he even knew Greek, but I knew he knew his Bible. And that's the important thing. And so, yeah, by all means, if you have opportunity to learn the languages, do it. It's great. It's really worth the effort, but it doesn't have to therefore show when you're preaching. And can I add one more thing about that? If you haven't learned the languages, then please don't quote it. Like, that's one of the most aggravating things, when someone has found something in a commentary and then tried to explain a Greek term, and you can tell from their explanation they've never done any Greek. And it's hard to explain that, because you think if someone says something, they know what they're talking about. If you know, you know, and if you know, you can tell.
I don't have original languages at all. And I don't think I've ever said a Greek word at the front of a meeting anyway. I just don't think.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's just not. It's not where I am.
Yeah,
and that's fine.
And so, yeah, that's the kind of the obvious, easy category to kind of flag, and just say, be careful, be careful. The technical. I think the motivation is, this is going to add clarity. This is going to add authority. The problem is it adds distance. It adds complexity. It adds a sense of, I can't access that. And that's really not what we want. We want our people to be going home saying, "Oh, that was such a feast. I really enjoyed the word. What a blessing. I want to keep reading it." Why would they keep reading it if they need you in order to explain it? Because it's so technical. Okay, so that's the Greek language. Then there's kind of, I suppose, related to that, English grammatical language that's technical. You know, so sometimes it's not that you're using a word that is actually Greek or Hebrew, but you're using grammar terms because commentaries use grammar terms.
Okay.
And so most grammar terms are not going to communicate to most people.
So you're thinking, are you thinking more than just saying this is a verb, this is an adjective? I mean, even that can lose a lot of people.
That
actually.
can lose people. But,
Yeah.
but it's the slightly more technical. I was thinking more the sort of type of participle or type of construction. This is a genitive absolute. Like, what? You can study Greek and still be scratching your head what a genitive absolute is. But saying, this is an attendant circumstance, or any of those kind of technical terms, which, again, it's important you know what an attendant circumstance is if you're dealing with participles in the Greek. It doesn't help to use that language when you're trying to explain it to other people. So, for example, Matthew 28, the Great Commission, depending on what level of study you have, you may say different things. There's only one verb in this, and that's make disciples. And so then the go disappears and we're all missionaries wherever we are. Not technically right. But to be technically right, you say, well, actually, go is a participle that is a attendant circumstance that brings with it the force of the main verb. I can't say that when you're preaching, right? But you do need to communicate the point that as Jesus is urging his disciples to make disciples, he's urging them with a go included. And so it's not as you are going, it's not by the way at some point in time. It's like, no, there's a kind of a pushing them outwards. Go make disciples. And so communicate the point without getting bogged down in the complexity of the Greek grammar or English definitions of Greek grammar. Okay, so that's probably kind of the same category. Let's call it two categories, just for the proliferation of categories, I guess. Okay, third one. What about theological terminology? Because you may not have done original languages, you have encountered some theological terminology.
And some are, I guess one of the things in my mind is that there's theological terminology that's, well, it's all biblical. There's theological terminology that is in the Bible, I should say.
Propitiation.
Exactly, for example.
Yeah.
And then there's sort of theological terminology.
Justified.
There's sort of...
There's quite a few.
Outside. Yeah, yeah, so it's kind of, again, it's not saying avoid those words, avoid those concepts for sure. Don't avoid the concepts, but even the words, the theological words are, some of them actually in the Bible, but there's plenty of theological words that aren't kind of in the Bible literally, but the concept is. And so it's thinking, well, again, that we want to use them because the words are shorthand for things, aren't they? So instead of every time defining propitiation, you can just say that's quite a long word, but it's the word propitiation is shorter than the definition.
Yeah,
that's every word is like that. I mean,
so if it's in the Bible, you're going to have to read it.
Yes,
and therefore you have to define it.
You have to. Yes, exactly.
That's fine.
And that's and again, I would say the same thing again. It's just you kind of, it means this, but kind of repeating it, repeating the definition. But
I say that's fine. But I suppose you don't have to go to that word if it's not in your passage.
Sure.
If you're preaching evangelistically, a normal setting, people there who don't know lots of New Testament, if the passage you're preaching just talks about God saving, then define saving. You don't have to add in justification, propitiation,
right.
Expiation, and all the other terms that you could find somewhere else.
Yeah. I think that's interesting. I think particularly with preaching evangelistically, I think I have to be even more explicit about stay in what you've read or stay in the passage, because both for losing people, but even just sort of an honouring people there. Like if you've got people non-Christians to have a Bible open, use the words that are there as much as possible. That's maybe another thing which we can.
And when do you not have potentially non-Christians there? I'm just trying to think, because I speak in churches, I speak in conferences, I speak in different settings. I always assume there's non-Christians there.
Yeah, that's really true. Yeah, we have to be always preaching to that sort of dual listener or kind of dual audience, that it's always going to be mixed.
Yeah.
So this is valid for thinking about all the time. So you've got those sort of Bible theology words, just define them, and if you can define them in a way that kind of, maybe there's going to be language and definitions in the passage itself, that's going to be really helpful.
Yeah.
But what about sort of outside the Bible, the complicated theological language that is again helpful for summarizing, but not helpful for communicating.
Exactly. Like if the books on the shelf didn't use technical language, they'd be bigger. Right, in some cases, right? They'd be longer, bigger, and so it is useful, but it is shorthand, and I think that's the helpful thing to realize is it's sort of a theological shorthand for a whole set of teaching.
Yeah, and if you don't know, if you don't know what the shorthand is, it can just feel like a code.
Yeah,
kind of like with the Greek stuff, it just feels like it's a secret code that you only know if you're special or or but if you don't know the shorthand of whatever,
and it could be, I don't know how to fully categorize it. It could be something that sounds incredibly complex, like, I don't know, my mind for some reason goes to things like some of the attributes of God language, some of the divine counsel, supralapsarianism, that sort of thing. That just sounds highly complex. Obviously, if you study it, then you're thinking in those terms, but you got to be careful because kind of throwing those terms around doesn't win listeners. It doesn't win their hearts. It doesn't win closeness. But then there's other things, sort of church labels. Oh, that's very charismatic or that's very reformed. Well, what does that mean? And so we want to watch for even language that we might use in normal life. And just say, well, hang on, I've got not, I'm having a conversation with Mike and I can use a label and I know that he knows what I mean by that label. If I've got 100 people in front of me or even one that I don't know, what do I mean by any label I use? And so I want to be careful with that. And there's some things that are not in the Bible, but maybe in our kind of Christian conversation, words like Trinity, for example, again, define. Don't let it become a code. Let it be effective communication. One more category, and then we'll see if we've got any more beyond that. But the fourth category is kind of in a sense, a catch-all, but it's not the language, grammatical terms, or theological terms. It's the terminology of your expertise. Okay, so if you happen to be a medical doctor, or you happen to be an engineer, or you happen to be a nutritionist, or whatever your job, an undertaker, I don't know what your job is, but whatever your job or training or background is, there is terminology in that if you use it when you're preaching, it won't communicate. You're nodding like you've got
No.
You're an undertaker?
No, I was just trying to think of the kind of undertaker expertise that would be, but there would be. I'm just thinking of even just the experience of starting a new job, and it could be like any job in an office or something. But you have to work really hard as the new person, but even as the people that are trying to welcome the new person, to just it's almost distressing how distracting everything is, because everyone knows, or it feels like everyone knows what they're doing apart from you. And taking that into preaching is that it can feel like this person knows everything and I know nothing, and it's just a block. And that can be, obviously with theologically the stuff we've talked about, but we can, even in some illustrations, we can use illustrations from our own life that just don't translate because not everyone's an undertaker or whatever. There's things that we can take for granted. Even, talking about football, I take for granted that I just assume everyone thinks or knows the same amount of stuff as I do. So even, talking about football, an illustration about a movie or about a book.
And that's not your career. No offense, but you're not a professional footballer.
No.
You're a normal fan, but you have terminology and ways of describing things that are shorthand.
Cricket is an obvious, talking about cricket to someone who doesn't like cricket is just completely alien. And I think, and part of that is, it's a helpful experience for someone to say, I don't know what that abbreviation means. Yeah. Oh, sorry, it means it. But that's quite a good experience. Yeah. For preaching, even is thinking,
We've got a tropical fish tank. I wouldn't call myself a what do you call yourself? I don't know. See, I'm not technically, but I do understand what's going on in that fish tank and how you keep the fish somewhat alive. And so even the smallest hobby generates terminology that you then have to explain if you use it.
Yeah.
And so we've got to be careful. And I suppose that kind of the methodology is we need to self-check, but we also need to get input. So self-check, as in just ask yourself, hang on, is there anything I'm saying or planning on saying in this message that somebody might not understand? If there is, then fix it, right? So you can self-check, but some things you just won't spot it because it goes through and it's so normal in your library or in your hobby or in your job or whatever that you don't even realize that people don't know what that is. And so then ask somebody, ask maybe your spouse. They might be swimming in the same terminology as you more than others. Ask someone in the church, someone in the congregation, hey, could you let me know if I use any words whatsoever that don't make sense? It's it's a bit humbling to find out, oh man, I'm not communicating, but it's important because we want to love our listeners, and that's the point. And it's an act of love to actually be understandable.
Yeah,
simple as that. We were thinking, how do we finish this episode? So I thought I'd read from the Greek. I'm just kidding.
In Greek.
In Greek, yeah, with no explanation. No, just thinking, my mind went to the end of Ephesians 4. So at the end of Ephesians 4, verses 25 to 32, Paul gives this whole set of instructions that relate to various things, including anger and forgiveness and generosity. But twice, he kind of I was going to say repeats himself. He doesn't. He circles back and goes deeper. But twice he's talking about what we say. And so first time in verse 25, he's saying, speak the truth to one another. But then he goes deeper in verse 29, and this is kind of where my mind went. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion. Now he's talking about interpersonal relationships and not tearing down and being corrupting with our words, doing damage through gossip and malice and criticism and so on. But that totally applies to preaching. As fits the occasion, thinking about who you're speaking to, make sure that what you say builds up. You don't want to have a paragraph, a sentence, or even a word that is failing to build up your listeners. Because the point of preaching is to build them up. The point of the words that we're using is to communicate. And so let's keep kind of take that on board, and let's pray that God would give us real wisdom, that we can understand the occasion, be self-aware in terms of the language we're using, and then communicate as clear and as simple and as effective as we possibly can, because we love the people we're preaching to and because we want them to know the God that we're speaking of. God's the master communicator. Talk about incarnational communication. He literally stepped into this world so we could understand him. He's given us his words so that we can know him. And so as preachers, we get to communicate that about him to them so that they can know him too. Something to think about? Hope so.
If you want to comment on anything, then do share maybe good examples of where you've done or where you've seen this, or where you've heard this happen, or again, if it's sort of words that you think, how would you define this, or how would you communicate this concept? Anything like that, do get in touch or kind of write a comment about it. But
if you give a negative example, don't name names.
Yeah, please. I guess unless it's yourself, and then you can.
Yeah,
that's fine. But we're grateful for you being with us again on another episode of our podcast, and we will be with you again soon.
Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate every positive review, like, share, and comment. And thank you for praying for us. We hope you will join us again next time on the Biblical Preaching Podcast.